Good morning, everyone. Hello. We're going to get started here really soon. And Tracy's back. Awesome.
Hello. Hey, folks. Yeah, no, having to deal with the gremlins today, but super happy we can be here and despite technology's best efforts, have this panel live. So welcome. I am Tracy Miranda, Executive Director of the Continuous Delivery Foundation and your host for today's conversation, which I am very excited about. So I'm coming to you live from Ottawa, Canada. Please let us know where you're joining from in the chat. And we'll go ahead and get to know our amazing panelists we have gathered today. So let's start with you, Tiffany. Do you want to do a quick introduction?
Sure, I'd love to. Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, from wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Tiffany Jachja. I am an engineering manager at Vox Media, and I help teams deliver better software. And I do it through many different avenues by holding space, sharing on Twitter, wherever else, and panels like this. So I'm super excited to be here with you all today and with our amazing panelists as well. So I'll let them introduce themselves as well.
Nigel?
Sure, I'll go first. Nigel, Kersten, field CTO at Puppet. So my background's operations, but I run a small consulting group inside Puppet at the moment, and we work with a lot of our biggest customers on solving what does it mean to try and do DevOps or even just be good at software delivery at scale. It turns out if you're a 20,000, 30,000 person company, this is not the simplest thing in the world to do. And I've been a co-author of the State of DevOps report for the last 10 years, and it's great to be here and talking about it. Continuing our theme of people persevering over technology that we've kicked off with.
Awesome. Thanks, Nigel. And go.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ger McMahon. I work for Fidelity Investments, where I head up our ALM tools and platforms product area in the cloud computing group. If you don't guess by the accent, I'm on the west coast of Ireland here in Galway. And I think trying to solve what Nigel just said in a large organization with 13,000, 14,000 engineers trying to figure out how to modernize software delivery and make it easy for people to get their business value into their hands of their customers. So delighted to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everybody. And thanks for everybody who is joining us live today. We're seeing some amazing locations, Nevada, Santa Fe, Guatemala. So yeah, truly global. And please go ahead and ask questions as we go. And leave us comments in the chat or drop them in the Ask a Question, and we'll be answering those as we go, or certainly leaving some time at the end. But let's get started with the report, which I'm very excited about. So nearly 40,000 technical professionals from around the world have contributed to the State of DevOps as a body of research over its 10-year lifetime, making it one of the most heavily cited DevOps findings in the world. So in its 10th year, and I really like how this year it had an amazing set of contributors, one of which was Tiffany Jachja. So Tiffany, you're a big fan of the reports, and do you still think they are relevant 10 years on?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. I definitely am a big fan of any type of state of industry report, because I think it gives not just the people who are, in the space a good sense of, what is the performance and how we've evolved over the years, but it also gives other folks who are joining in the space or thinking about slowly integrating certain aspects of DevOps into their industries a good sense of how to do that as well. And the really great reports, any really great industry report will kind of give you a good sense of the landscape of change. And I think that's one of the things that ultimately every leader in this space or every successful team tends to understand, the nature of change and how things kind of progress and evolve in terms of the work that they do, right? And it's so important when we talk about DevOps and we talk about delivery that we kind of think about that aspect, right? And I think that tends to be the reason why you may have a lot of questions about what is DevOps today, and what does it mean to be a DevOps engineer? It's because when we think about delivery, there's so many different pieces of it, so you can't really tell this story without talking about agile or talking about cloud or containers and so many different aspects, right? And so I think it's always really great to be able to kind of think about it from the perspective of like, this is all, like, what does it all encompass at the end of the day? And so that's what this report really does. And the nice thing about inviting commentary and inviting others to speak on the report is that you also get to see some of the faces and the companies and the organizations that are integrating this work and seeing how it makes an impact to, you know, different customers and different businesses, right?
Yeah, no, awesome. Well said. And with that, let's dive straight into this year's report. And yeah, we're thrilled to have Nigel as one of the authors here. So Nigel, why don't you go ahead and tell us, like, who is the target audience for the report and what were the key findings in this year's report?
Yeah, so I want to jump on a little bit of what Tiffany was talking about there, which is that I think it's easy for us to forget sometimes how, even if you don't feel like you're at the cutting edge, if you're listening to this webinar, if you're involved with the Continuous Delivery Foundation, if you're out there on Twitter talking about DevOps, if you're reading people's books, you are the 1% of the 1%. And I think the more I've worked with enterprise customers, and there is this whole world of IT of people who don't hang out on Twitter, who don't use social media a lot. They have a 9-to-5 job. They have the job because it's got a great healthcare plan. It's pretty reasonable. The stress isn't too bad. And these are fantastic reasons to have a job. Like, I don't want to sound like I'm being dismissive. You know, everyone's got to eat. Your job doesn't have to be a passion project. But I think it's easy for us to forget sometimes when you're in the middle of all of these conversations about what is DevOps, what does it actually mean, everything, that for 95% of the people in IT, they're just not really engaged in that conversation. And DevOps often ends up being something that happens to them. Like there's an initiative inside their organization, or someone said you have to learn some DevOps skills and they're not really sure what that means. So one of the goals we've always had for the report is try and produce something accessible. And this is one of the reasons why we produced it in a report format, in a PDF that gets handed around inside enterprises, you know, like sort of gets us to break out of that bubble somewhat of the folks who are actually really good at this. And, you know, for many of us, we've been talking about this topic for like 10 years, but for other people, last month, their boss sent them an email going, you need to learn what DevOps is. So I think that's really important for us to keep in mind. As far as the target audience goes, if I back up a little bit about how we actually do the report. So we survey people about practices and outcomes, like how frequently can you deploy? Do you have version control shared across your developers? These sorts of things. And we do cluster analysis to essentially work out how do we link that to more of a business value conversation. And as this is one of the, again, most overloaded terms, I think, in our industry in terms of, you know, business value. But this is meant for us that the report has multiple audiences. If you're a DevOps engineer, or, you know, whether you have that title or not, if you're working in this space as a practitioner, it should be useful for you in terms of how do I improve how my team works. If you're a team lead or a director, it should be useful in terms of how do I make my team work more efficiently and more pleasantly and happily with other teams next to it. And if you're at the C-level, you can just read the executive summary, which is relatively simple words, you know, fits in between your, you know, changing flights in the business lounge or whatever. But you'll get a sense of, well, what is this DevOps thing? What does it actually mean in terms of business value? Why would I care? So the things that I'm most proud of with the report in terms of target audience is when I talk to like a team lead or a practitioner who's like, I'm trying to get things to change here. And I gave the report to my boss, who gave it to their boss, who gave it to their boss. And they went, oh, I get it now. You're not just talking about setting up a CI/CD pipeline or going cloud native or whatever. You're talking about making us more resilient and they're able to respond to change, and sort of pitching the conversation that way. So that's sort of the whole background of who we've generally targeted with the report. As far as the big findings this year, one of the things, and we can dive into this a little more deeply so I'm not hogging all of the time, was that we a while ago, we came up with a way of sort of mapping out an evolutionary model. Because one of the things we kept hearing was everyone was going, look, I'm inside a big company. It hasn't changed for 50 years. You know, we only barely just adopted virtualization in the last few years. I know what the sort of shining light on the hill in terms of DevOps is, of, you know, small cross-functional teams with lots of autonomy, shipping software and singing Kumbaya. But my organization is nothing like that. What do I do first? And so we wanted to try and really map out that beginning of the journey. And for a lot of people, it's things as simple as put your system configurations in version control. Hell, have a version control system everyone can actually get to that's a single one inside your organization. And we forget, I think, again, sometimes that these building blocks are really, really important. So we do this analysis and we essentially, have people you can categorize as low, medium, high levels of evolution. And one of the things we've noticed for the last few years was that lots of organizations moved from low to medium, but they're struggling to get to high. And there's a classic bell curve there, but the middle is massive. And the more we dove into it, the more we realized organizations were just getting to a certain point in terms of success with DevOps and not being able to break beyond it. So we wanted to investigate a whole bunch of hypotheses for why is this? Why do people get stuck in the middle? And if any of you have read the Team Topologies book by the fantastic Matt Skelton and Manuel Pei, they have a whole bunch of philosophies in there around platform teams and value stream teams and how to organize a big software delivery organization that I found really, really compelling and useful. And so we sat down with them, they came on as co-authors, and we went to test those hypotheses. And it turns out that sort of a model around teams, identities, and interaction correlates really strongly with higher levels of DevOps. And there's a bunch of other findings we found around, lots of people think of cloud or automation as synonyms for doing DevOps, and we managed to show with data that they correlate strongly, but there's no predictive power. And there's a whole bunch of meat in the report about how to break out of the middle. And yeah, I think that's about this year. Other than it was 10 years, and so we thought we'd take a little bit of a look back. And as some of you have mentioned, we invited a bunch of people to give commentary, because this can get kind of dry when you're just giving people stats and numbers. And I really wanted to try and break it up this year with some human faces and human words and opinions.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think there's a lot of topics in there that we're going to try and unpack and just get into some more details. Let's start with the team side of it, because I found that part of the report really fascinating. And you mentioned, big companies looking for shining lights, and if only we had someone from a big company with a shining light. So on the teams, first of all, for folks who haven't read the report highlights that teams that are good at DevOps have 3 key features. So one is strong identities that are well understood across the organization. Second, clear responsibilities with a high degree of autonomy. And third, well-defined communication channels with other teams. So I'd love everyone in the audience to think about if that's true for their team. And I'm also going to put that to Ger. Does this ring true for you? And in your experience, does that reflect the reality you're seeing on the ground at Fidelity?
100% reflects reality. And I was just smiling as Nigel was talking there about large enterprises and even the diversity of, in a single, never mind across enterprises across the globe, even within large enterprises, that same diversity, people who have worked for years on mainframes or, legacy technology, legacy, what we might call now from a technology perspective, but those still provide vital business values that continue, got to run, operate the business. And then you have the new shiny stuff on the far right, which is, fantastic for everyone and a far simpler problem to have, fully autonomous, high degrees of maturity. But from when I look at it as part of my role is I need to accommodate all. I need to accommodate the people who are working in those older technologies which may not lend themselves 100% to full automation, to cloud, to kind of DevOps, full autonomy, and obviously for the teams who want to go really, really fast. But when we talk about teams, one of the first things I did when I took over this was I'm a big sports fan. Anybody who knows from Ireland, I'm from Limerick. We just won the All-Ireland hurling final. So akin to the FA Cup final or Champions League or World Series. But one of the things they talked about was team and team identity. So if we take any organization, any type of team, identity is hugely strong because that's what bonds and binds all of those team members together. It creates what they want to do, what's their philosophies, what do they want to be known for, their brand, what the principles are. And and Tracy, you mentioned earlier about the communications and how other people view those. If you don't have that strong brand, that strong what you're known for, and other people can't resonate with your team, then it's very difficult to have that dialogue. So, and also I think teams with strong brands, especially around things we might associate with maturity, like high quality, innovation, experimentation. I think there's a huge amount of trust and confidence gets built across the organization in those teams that this team is in the right direction. They're leading us down a strategic path, or a path we can believe in, and where we can gain adoption, we can have contribution models, and again, all open dialogue, open and transparency across everything. Without that, it doesn't matter what technology you use, if it's Crowdcast, if it's Zoom, if it's Slack, Teams, what you pick any one of them. If you don't have that engagement with your customers or your development teams, then the technology doesn't help. So first thing we actually focused on was each individual team had to build its own brand, and we let them off. And we didn't ask that all of the teams have similar ones. We just go, what makes you? What's your brand? What's your personality? And your personality really as a team is it's all an aggregate of all of the individual personalities, and that goes.
And would that be expressed maybe through the team name? How would they get the brand across?
Exactly, we went all out. So team names. So we're not called the pipeline team or the source code management team, right? So we're actually some of our team names, Curious Martians, and is it Marvin the Martian is their avatar, and they have an actual banner. So every team has an avatar, every team has a banner, and that's what they use. We set them up across all of our tool chain, and then they have like, why did they pick those? We have a team called Magic Dragons, and they named all of their ceremonies like after kind of dragon or that type of genre. So they've renamed all their ceremonies. And again, it's a bit of fun, it's a bit of entertainment. People ask questions about it, and it's a great way to kind of have an open door for conversation. So we went all out in that. And then what we did was we decided, one of the things I found from previous, when we had all of these tools, and traditionally we might say, here's your social code management tool. There you go. And there's a team for that. And here's another tool and another tool and another tool. And it's very hard to articulate to your customers, your engineers, well, what do you do for me? So we actually turned it around and said, we present everything in developer language. So what is it from your perspective? What value do you get from the platform we're trying to build or the capabilities we're offering you? And so when they look at our values or they look at our capabilities or the outcomes we're looking to achieve, they read it and it's written for them. So they read, oh, I understand now what you do. I understand what you provide, how I would use it in a day, and what kind of value gives me, and why do I want to use this? Because it allows me to deliver my software faster, or it mitigates risk or manages risk, or it provides automated change management or whatever other process. And then we engage with them, and we created these things called working groups. So they're part of our extended members, so key members. So there are advocates across all of the other teams, so they feel they have a voice. And when we pilot technology or we pilot POC things, we invite them in to participate and get early feedback. So I think all of that kind of helps generate that identity, generates the teams, the interactions we have with everybody. And because at the end of the day, if I build the greatest thing in the world and nobody uses it, does it provide any value? And versus like if I've got 13,000 happy developers, then I will consider myself successful. So until I get them all very happy, I says, it's going to be an ongoing journey and a process of continuous improvement and learning.
Awesome. So it sounds like, not a DevOps team in sight, which is good. And I love how you're doubling down on that, not just product mindset, but brand mindset, almost like the sports teams. That's fun. Every team has a logo. And
Absolutely.
Tiffany, to add to that, you're building teams and particularly data teams. So is there that same focus on building these cross-functional product-focused teams? And do you also end up having to consider the team of team structure in the organization and how maybe the data teams relate to the other teams and what their interactions are?
Yeah, it's a little different and a little bit of the same in some strange ways, I want to touch on something Ger mentioned about happy developers, right? Like we know we have a happy developer when their code is being shipped out, it's having an impact, people understand it, we're having discussions that are meaningful, right? No one wants to write code just so that like no one understands it and it doesn't get used for another 20 years and doesn't get the love and the attention that it wants. And I see that being similar in the data space, right? We don't want to ship out data products and solutions that aren't integrated, that aren't accessible to other people, that aren't democratized. And so in order to really deliver modern or usable data solutions, we have to be cross-functional. We have to touch front-end development, we have to touch web applications, microservices, like across the entire organization, right? And so when I think about that, I really want to go back to some of the things that the panel has mentioned about mission and identity, team identity, because that's so important, right? And then the second part is investment. What happens when you pass this report to your manager's manager and now they understand it? And now because you understand what you're doing as a team, you can really envision what it's like to invest in particular engineering initiatives so that you can support further projects, right? And it's so important to kind of understand that in a data team, just like in a DevOps ecosystem, there are silos, right? There's like one of the first things that we ever did in the DevOps space was just acknowledge the fact that there was a silo between operations and development, right? And the same thing exists in data teams. There's silos between data, research, and then production, deploying it, right? Productionalizing it. And so if you can identify those kinds of silos or buckets of work, then you can begin to realize that, like, yes, I have to invest in all of these kinds of aspects in order to support this kind of end-to-end vision that I have to be able to, deliver solutions that work, right? And on a continuous basis, not just once or, not just like, oh, we ship it and it's done. No, that's not how the world works today, right? We know that there's more demand, there's features to be, added and to be iterated upon. And it's like not about just like this waterfall methodology where we ship it and boom, where we never have to touch it again. It's this iterative process that we continuously try to improve. And so, for me, I tend to think about these buckets of work and how each bucket kind of touches so many different parts of the organization. Even if you were to just, for example, look at your data strategy and how you're storing data, right? It's not just your data team that's going to be using it. Your software teams use it. Your business teams use it. Analysts use it, right? Even nowadays, we're making data-driven decisions. And so, if you can kind of think of it from that perspective, that's how you can begin to drive quite a bit of it.
Awesome.
I want to jump in. Double muted. Something you just said there, Tiffany, that there's a quote from one of my favorite people in tech, Patrick Dubois, who's like very much the godfather of the whole DevOps movement. And we've got a quote from him in the report where I interviewed him where he said, it's taken him 10 years to come up with a definition of DevOps. And anyone who's been swimming around this space is, the eternal arguments over what exactly is DevOps. But he came out with, if you're not focused on reducing friction and minimizing silos between different parts of your org, you're not doing DevOps. And I really love that sort of bluntness of that definition. And I think it aligns very much to what you were just saying.
Awesome. And yeah, let's stick with the topic of teams. And I'm going to take this question from Bala and maybe pose that to you, Nigel. Bala asks, how is the DevOps process getting implemented in areas like machine learning as multiple entities involved? So I think this whole idea of, okay, we're getting more potential silos. So, how would the team topologies work, or how would you approach that?
Yeah, so there's a few. So first, as a little bit of a disclaimer, my background, I actually have a philosophy cognitive science degree. So I have very strong opinions when people use the words artificial intelligence. But I think I've pretty much given up this battle, that really we're talking about statistics powered by large computational power. And we've decided to call it artificial intelligence, which is fine. Everything is absolutely fine. I would say there's a few different things here. One, and this is maybe the cynic in me coming out, I feel like a couple of years ago was very much the hype cycle for AI ops and ML ops. And everyone was just like, you can't manage stuff at scale unless we get the robots to start making decisions for us. And one of the things that sort of irritates me about this is there's so much low-hanging fruit. Like before you go through all the complexity of machine learning and artificial intelligence, these are not simple projects to deploy. Like just cleaning up data, like doing analysis, building up the right skills in your team, working out how to actually make use of these things as part of control loops. It's really complicated work. You know what's not complicated work? Setting clear goals for your teams, working on their interactions between them, making people aligned to and shared responsibility. You're going to fail unless you have those things. So that's sort of one of my first disclaimers, that I think lots of people reach for AI and ML when really, some basic automation, some basic discipline in process actually gets you an awful long way. That being said, I think there is clearly huge sort of value here. If you look at the team topologies model, and I'm going to sketch it out really quickly, it's basically that, first I'm going to talk about what not to do with DevOps teams. And I see this all the time in big organizations. People are like, we're going to follow the 2 pizza team model from Amazon. We're going to have 6 to 8 people. They're going to get to pick their own tooling, pick their own processes, work out how they do deployment, and we're going to have 500 of these teams. I mean, even if you've only got 20 of these teams, you've got a problem. And sure, this is fine, and you're locally optimizing for the team, but then your poor auditors, anyone who cares about change management process, there's all these adjacent functions to IT in a big company that are actually really important. And if you go and make their life hell, you're slowing down the overall system. And so that local optimization has come at the cost of global optimization. So the team topologies model is, don't do that. Instead, have a platform team that essentially manages your infrastructure, but has a product mindset. And we've talked about this a few times today about what that means. And for me, it's pretty simple. It's recognizing you're not just delivering raw computing capabilities to your users. Treat them like a market. Like there are users in that space who have problems, and you're looking to come to them with solutions, like you're building a product and selling it. You're just inside a big captive organization where you want to try and actually solve problems for your users. So an example, don't just give your developers raw access to your VMware APIs. What's their actual problem? They probably want to provision test environments, do regression testing. And so focus on actually solving those problems. So the team topologies model, that I think they basically described something I've seen most successful large enterprises do, which is centralize around a platform team, around all your infrastructure, CI/CD pipelines, all of those things, so that development teams can independently and autonomously ship value to their end users. And they're not repeating work all over the place of everyone's working out a different way to provision a VM. One of the things, and I swear I'm getting back to your question, Bala, is that there are areas where you need specialist knowledge. And I think machine learning is one of those. You're not going to take all of your sysadmins, DevOps engineers, SREs and go, you know what you all are? You're all now machine learning engineers. It's a different skill set and it's specialized. And so the model that I think works really well is you have a reasonably large platform team, you have many, many different value stream teams, and then you have these specialized subsystem teams for specialized knowledge that generally are focused on how do I take this area of complexity, make it a simple API, library, whatever, so that more people can make value out of it. And I think this is the general theme that I've been seeing, that the organizations that are succeeding are the ones that have worked out how to go, these people have specific expertise, and what we need to do is work out how do we scale that out across the organization. And the other big myth in DevOps is we should all be collaborating all of the time. It turns out collaboration is really expensive. It's absolutely necessary, but I don't know about most of you who are listening, but I've yet to see an organization where there's as many operations people as there are developers. And so if you spend all of your time collaborating with those development teams, you're not actually going to make a lot of progress. So the model we've seen, and we saw this from the report, that works is you collaborate deeply with your internal users at the design phase and go, okay, how do we collaborate, formalize this thing, turn it into code, turn it into an API, so that then you can use this as a service and we never talk again. And I'm kind of joking, but that is the way to actually scale. How do you operationalize and automate expertise that specific people have so that many people inside the organization can get value out of it? And I think this is really key for the machine learning and AI side, because it is a really specialist skill.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for the answer. A quick question. So is the platform team just a rebranding of the shared services teams you'd hear about, or what are the differences people might see? Are they differences?
There's a few differences. At least a lot of the traditional shared services teams that I'd worked with were, if you had this idea of a service catalog, it often wasn't modular or composable. You got these relatively big, you'd log on to an enterprise blue web portal internally that would have a couple of big buttons and you click on it and they would be your options. But to build new items to be in that catalog often required, again, specialist knowledge from the 4 people who've been trained how to use this one particular, shared service platform that's being used. What's different with platform teams is it's almost always API first, because API first lets your users recompose those solutions in different ways. And this is the other point that I think, when you have technical users and when you have developers, if you give them the right levels of APIs and the ways to compose them, then that lets different development teams come up with their own solutions that are all still living on common building blocks. So your auditors and your compliance and your change management folks aren't all getting heartburn. So that's generally been the way I've seen this sort of work.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, I like that. APIs for recomposable platforms makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's move on a little. And earlier in, Nigel, you touched on this idea that the vast majority of organizations are stuck in this mid-level DevOps evolution. Now, a high level of DevOps evolution means deploying on demand, lead times and mean time to recovery of less than an hour and less than 5% change failure rate. So should high-level evolution really be the goal for every organization out there, regardless of industry?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. I get this a lot because, deployment frequency can be a vanity metric. Like it can be a thing where people go, whoa, I went from, I can deploy once an hour to twice an hour. We're twice as good. And that's not necessarily true. But if you look at where the low folks are, the low folks are at the multiple months to push a change out to production. The people in the middle are weeks and days. And there is something really transformative of moving from days in terms of your ability to deploy change to an hour or less. And this doesn't mean you have to deploy all that frequently, because in some organizations, if I'm building healthcare hardware, heart rate monitors, etc., I'm not going to, move fast and break things. You have a fundamentally different mindset. If I work at an investment bank and I'm handling, lots and lots of money, I'm not going to be particularly experimental with the way I build services around these different things. So I think what's critical is having the ability to be able to deploy quickly. Because even if you're not creating that much change in your organization, bad things will happen. And it turns out the skills and processes you need in order to repair a bad thing happening that could be quite disastrous are exactly the same levels of discipline that you are required to push out regular change. So for me, it's been like, and this is one of for those who are looking for reasons to bring to their boss or boss's boss about why you should be trying to improve these things, the practice of going through and making sure as an organization you can deliver software frequently with that sort of deployment frequency gives you a much better security posture. And that's often a thing you can make an argument for to your bosses, that they go, intrusion happens, major vulnerability comes out, rather than it being all hands on deck scrambling. It's just, we are good at doing this. We can push out a change within an hour to all of production. We know what it means to design that, to test it, to revert it, like all of these sorts of things. So I don't think everyone should have to deploy that frequently, but I think being able to deploy that frequently unlocks all sorts of other benefits to the organization.
And I think that's a powerful argument for people to use the security. We need to patch
security always gets more budget than operations. So if you're an operations person and you're trying to scramble for budget, just stick a security angle on it. I mean, hell, even call it DevSecOps, my least favorite term. But...
I did like the bit in the report which talks about DevSecOps and has everybody with the curmudgeons, all the curmudgeons. And I think Catherine Yee finally says, well, if it's going to help people get paid better and position their job better, let's not be
absolutely. When we were all sysadmins, we were all getting crappy salaries. And, the running joke used to be for a long time amongst my circle was DevOps to developers means I don't need operations anymore. But DevOps to operations means I finally get paid as well as a developer does.
All right, sad but true. There we go. We wouldn't begrudge people the buzzwords in their titles. Okay, So I like that the report had some strategies for how organizations can escape that middle. And one of the key ones was taking this platform team approach. So it says highly evolved firms make heavier use of internal platforms and enable other teams via self-service. So Ger, what can you tell us about your approach there and scaling when it comes to internal platforms? Because I believe we've seen presentations at CDCon about the internal platform at Fidelity. So what can you tell our audience about your approach there?
Yeah, and again, I'll probably touch across some things Tiffany and Nigel said, especially around data, because I think it was one massive anomaly where it was missing in kind of the ALM or CI/CD type tooling, and all this data just dropping out, and then all that value is lost to make decisions as we move along. But one of the things we noticed was, when you think of all of these different tools, we handed all the tools to the developers, right, and said, there you go. And again, it's difficult, right? And you have to stitch it together, and then every team stitches it together slightly different, and then all of these software delivery processes, just start growing and growing and growing. And what Nigel said, if there's a security thing, then it's very difficult. How do you have one way of releasing anything when you've then now got to ring every team and decide, okay, well, you need to do this. Well, where's my data? Well, it's in the log file. Hold on, let me ring someone who's got admin access to that tool, and they dig into the server and go to the log file, find out information. So everything kind of really, really slows down. And while we were in data centers, actually, I don't think it was a big issue, or the fact that everybody was so slow, maybe 3 months, every 3 months, a quarter releasing, the pain of it was not kind of big enough for people. I'll just stick through it because it's once a quarter, 4 times a year, I'm okay. But if you get to on demand, suddenly it becomes really, really, really painful and kind of slows all of the team down, and actually, grinds change management center functions to a halt, because now there's teams queuing up looking for this, and there's a backlog, so you slow down. So there's all this, it's very symbiotic and very cyclical, and everything starts impacting everything else, and it slowly grinds. So we looked at it as, okay, as a developer, what do I want to do? Well, I want to come to my team, and I want all of the things I need to write my software and get it into the hands of my customer. And at the end of the day, I think it's that simple. I want to ensure quality, I want to manage risk, et cetera, et cetera. So we looked at it that perspective and said, okay, what do you need? And so well, obviously you got all the tools. So that's one. And we know you got to write code, you got to store code in this, you got to build code, you got to test code, you got to package, create artifacts, you got to store artifacts, you have to do security analysis, and et cetera, et cetera. You got to deploy to somewhere. And then do you want to track that when you're doing it? So what we looked at was, okay, we got all of that, but they're all interlinked. So we actually created a concept of our developer experience portal. So when you just come to a portal and say, okay, I want to build an app, right? And then just I don't care about anything else. Just give me all of the resources, provision everything for me, configure everything for me. So I think that was a large gap that we noticed, was how do I configure it to have this CI tool point to this Git repo? How do I know when I have I'll talk about the data in a second, but when I create a pull request, it does these things happen? How do I ensure all of them happen? And then we got into pipelines, and we decided, okay, well, when I'm doing a pipeline, unit test is unit testing. It doesn't matter, if you're using Java and you're using JUnit, my app, your application, it's just the same. If you're running a scan, quality scan, again, you're just using a tool, passing your code. So the actual how you do it is really a commodity. So we created all of these commodity utilities that people can just use and pipe and put them in a template. And I think to Nigel's point earlier, is we can actually now certify these ways. So if you've got a Spring Boot application going to a container onto Amazon or Azure or Google, that could be templatized, and we can actually bake all of the certification into that template and say, if you use this, here's what you inherit. You write code, press a button, and the rest of the things can happen. And we can have manual gates and stuff in it. But the data is where it's key, right? And which is, we thought, right, well, how do I know this application or this code is high quality? How do I know it's secure? How do I know it works with all my other pieces of code. So we actually looking at take all of the data, whether it's real time through an eventing model, whether it's in log files as part of a tooling. We're actually gathering and harvesting all of that data, storing it, and we're reusing it then along further points of the pipeline. So we have evidence gathered. If we did this, here's the evidence. So we can now gate that pipeline and say, yeah, we have the evidence collected. Yeah, you're good to go, pass. We can measure engineering excellence, maturity, other things and also gives teams who are struggling, right? High performing teams, top class engineers using cloud, they've nowhere to just let me go fast. But the teams that struggle, how do you help them? That's where our focus should be and how do we leverage what those brilliant teams are doing with high degrees of maturity? How do we codify that excellence into things that we can then share with other teams and they can adopt? And really, they kind of like, instead of they can jump a load of rungs on that ladder and be confident that they're maybe as they're learning that they're not creating a risk or an exposure anywhere. So that's where I think the platform can really help accelerate teams. And again, we always talk about this concept of above the line and below the line. And like our business want every developer spending time above the value line. So as many minutes a day that there's coding business value, that's success. So the more they're below the line, like creating a CI pipeline, is that value to our business, our customers, or any Fidelity customers? It's not. So the more we can commoditize and provide via the platform should free up more and more time that they're coding for their customers and getting the business value out. So and the platform enables that, and the platform concept, and then we can centralize, share, we can best practices, and even migration teams. I think if you want to migrate from legacy tool A to modern tool B, because you've got a platform, you can actually then have patterns of saying, okay, we can look at you, here's how to migrate. So we can actually assist teams in the migration and actually provide real value and benefits to our customers, all the developers and the teams. And again, constantly make them happier, but not worry where they sit across that maturity curve. And just provide equality to everybody. And I think I like the way, even leading up to this, Nigel talked about people, right? It's not technology, it's people as well, right? So sometimes we can lose that. So by helping people, I think you just get a much better environment.
You've said two things there that I wanted to highlight because I think they're really good bits of advice for anyone doing a platform team approach. One is, your job is, if you're running the platform, your job isn't to mandate everyone must use these particular tools. Like you talked about packaging up utilities and making them available in the form of templates. Your goal should be to make the right thing easy, but if you mandate it, you're not necessarily going to solve everyone's problems in the right way. There are going to be teams who have exceptions who are like, well, that doesn't fit my world. And the way you resolve that is the second thing you brought up, which is you create communities of practice amongst your users so they can share solutions amongst each other. And for any of you who are work at organizations that get access to the Gartner data, whatever you think of analysts, the Gartner stuff on how to build a platform team is absolutely top shelf. Like, it's advice on how to build out communities of practice, the role of the platform product manager, and it's absolutely fantastic. But I wanted to try and bring this back to one of the questions that, hopefully I said this name correctly, Ko asked about how do you boost people to become autonomous teams in bureaucratic companies where they don't want to take the leadership to do it. I think there's a little bit of nuance here that's important to bring out, which is, so if you take free speech as an example, like people have the right to have free speech, but there are boundaries to this, like the classic, you don't yell fire in a crowded theater if there's not actually a fire. Like, that doesn't fall under the rubric of free speech. And people often, when they talk about, we want autonomy inside a big org, sometimes they're saying, I want to be able to do whatever I want. And they're not exactly the same thing. And you talked, Ger, about being above the line. Like, if you're in a development team, you're like, we should be autonomous. We should get to pick our cloud platform, what operating systems are running, all of our architectures, what database layer we have. All of these decisions impact other people because you work inside a community, a large socio-technical organization, and your decisions have impact on other people. So it's sort of a little bit, counterintuitive, but the restrictions around the platform team are what actually allow people to go fast and focus above the line. An analogy I often use is, if you were in a city and every different suburb and every different area of the city had different road widths, different road markings, which side of the road you drove on, the signposts were different, it would be complete chaos. And that may be freedom and autonomy, but it's not actually helping anyone get to the goals they actually want. I will get off my hobby horse now. But hopefully to answer your question, I think the answer is it is difficult to get people to change their mindset. But I think if you're a team who has a responsibility to deliver something to the company, if someone is coming along going, hey, we can remove roadblocks so it's easier for you to do that, they're generally okay with it.
Yeah, and that's been the experience, I think, as and you ask people, right? And we've probably done the opposite, where we have had, here's the mandate, right? D1, please everybody use, and and it's never successful. But I think by engaging people, by having flexibility and engaging people, well, what would you like to see? What are your biggest pain points? Where are your concerns? And how do we address them? I think by putting a big wall or the doors in front of an office, kind of don't create that environment where if you've an open door and people can freely come in and have open comms and say, even if it's challenging conversation, but as long as it's towards moving everybody in the right direction, I think, and everybody's open to that. That's why team identity and having that's really, really important. Again, it's all interconnected with each other. You end up on a path where everybody is happy. You're not locked. And again, the biggest thing nobody wants is, well, are you going to impact my ability to deliver for my business? And I think if they don't view you as a blocker or something that's going to constrain or slow them down, then I think most people are very, very open to it. And we're removing roadblocks, we're removing points of friction to allow you go faster and faster to do the things you love. And I think, and I think then you get that traction and you get that kind of openness for everyone to participate.
Yeah. I love everything that everyone said so far. Like, I think whether you acknowledge it or not, like if you're an individual contributor, you're amplifying the team culture, the team dynamic, right? And so I think one of the important things to note is just like when you have opinions, when you read the State of DevOps report, right, as an individual contributor, as an engineer, like you're allowed to have your opinions. It's good that you have your opinions, right? Like, again, our platform teams provide governance and structure so that you can remove the roadblocks the way that you need to as a team. There is no right or wrong answer in terms of like what tools you use or how you work. You can make your processes work for you. I mean, processes at the end of the day and our technology at the end of the day is just here to support like what we actually want to have come true and that outcome that we actually want to achieve. And so I think that's a really great conversation that is that ties back to a lot of what everyone was saying, like around being able to have discussions and community and insights that are shared across, various teams and various individuals. And that's so, so important.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And we've got the questions are coming in thick and fast. So let's tackle a few of those and theirs. So Merrick Murphy says, there's been a lot of talk on how DevOps works in organizations, but what about from an individual level? If a single developer wanted to take anything from the report into their office to improve their own day-to-day operations, not the operations of the business as a whole, what would you say those would be?
I don't think you can do DevOps with one person. I think there are going to be skills you can learn in terms of maybe having more empathy. If you're a developer, having more empathy for operations and having an understanding of how you might be able to structure your application to reduce the operational burden. But I think DevOps fundamentally is about improving the relationship and reducing friction between groups. And so one person doesn't really do DevOps on their own. But I maybe have a rather black and white view on this.
No, I think, definitely. Software delivery, unfortunately, is a team sport. So best you can do is drop the report on their desks and get back to things. Okay, Michael Thomas Clark asks, on the matter of internal platforms, how do you speakers define this phrase? I don't believe it was clearly defined in the State of DevOps report. Now, I believe that was actually a big feature of the 2020 report. And maybe, Nigel, you want to give a quick summary, and I'm going to go see if I can dig up.
Yeah, we did have a little brief definition in there, which is a quote from Evan Botler on Martin Fowler's site. And if you never read, Martin Fowler is one of the wisest people in our entire industry. But essentially, and first I'm going to apologize for our industry, that platform is one of the most horribly overloaded words in, like, I swear I've been inside conversations where people are talking about, we need to get the platform team to make an update to the platform so that the platform can, and you're just like, what are we even talking about at this point? But having a platform team is about centralizing a bunch of your IT functions, but not in terms of the old sort of central IT where you interacted entirely through tickets. The critical aspect is that you think about your IT capabilities as a set of products that are continuously evolving to meet developer needs. And that means, and there's a whole bunch to unpack in there, it means that you need to actually be able to collaborate with them around the design phase. You need to actually interact with them, understand what their problems are, create feedback loops. And again, we're building things that are modular and composable. So you want to make the right thing easy. You want to make it so that your developers can share solutions amongst each other. And I think one of the biggest signifiers that people are doing a platform team well is that they have a platform product manager. Because again, I think a lot of this conversation's touched on this, which is you can't mandate the use of these things. But what you can do and should do is evangelize those capabilities. And if any of you are the sort of people who like going out and convincing people to use technology, you have good technical awareness, I genuinely think one of the strongest areas of growth in the next few years is going to be product managers for platforms. Like if you're into DevOps and you're into scaling these things out, this is everyone I know who is trying to hire for this role is really struggling with it. And if you're in this job right now, you could probably ask for more money.
Yeah, there you have it, especially for folks in your bureaucratic organizations. Just go find a company who wants your skills. Yeah.
There's a better place. Someone will love you more.
Awesome. Okay, I dropped in. Greg Arnett. Oh, Greg, I'm not sure we're going to get into this, but interested in your thoughts about GitOps and shift left workflows and strategies. Are these the latest fads or enduring new ways? GitOps seems to just push the problem managing processes in Git and hope for the best. Okay, I'm going to limit responses to 2 minutes, folks, and then we can set up a whole separate discussion for these.
Okay, I'm going to jump in really quickly. Keeping things, infrastructure as code, configuration management, all of these things living in version control, we've been doing this for a long time. Where I think GitOps fails is where it abdicates the user responsibility. If you go, hey, users of my stuff, your interface is editing a horrific YAML, JSON, whatever file inside a version control repo, and then magic happens. I genuinely think you're abdicating your user responsibility to make decisions on behalf of the users so they can move more quickly. That being said, having everything trigger automatically once commits happen to version control is a wonderful way for certain kinds of operations to run.
Yeah, I think personally.
Moving on. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I would rush too fast.
And I think it's the right tool for the right choice, right? So the right, whatever the problem is, what is the right tool? What is the right architecture, design strategy, etc. Right? So everything can be used very well, but equally everything can be used very wrongly. And I think it's understanding what the problem is and the solution you're doing, and then look at technology last in how you actually provide it.
Okay, great. Okay, one on the banking sector. Bala asks, as part of DevOps process, how are compliances like PCI DSS, FedRAMP policies getting implemented and audited in terms of the banking sector? Anything you want to say to that, Joe?
Yeah, so obviously, we're in a regulated, so we have internal apps with no, well, I wouldn't say no regulations. We have actually engineering regulations, and we try to comply to what best practices are. But we do have other federal regulations and corporate regulations. And again, it can all be done, and it actually can all be done much simpler. So I talked earlier about the platform concept, and Tiffany would talk about like data disappearing or being siloed within a tool or a service. By the platform, you enable collaboration across all of the data and all the tools. So one of the things we're building is like something we're calling it the pipeline evidence store. So if you use the templates, if you run everything as is, and we provide immutable ones and we provide ability to have mutable, so they're best practice, but you're free to kind of modify or update. But the ones we certify, then we're actually looking at the certificate baked in. So you run the pipeline, you run your production, you do everything, and at the end of it, it actually creates the cert for you based on what the policy is for that particular regulation. And it's actually not that difficult, but you have to ensure all the data. And this is where the scale comes in. So if you take every application that's got no standards or no templates or using whatever tooling, every application from an auditor is a snowflake. Every single application, even if they have multiple deployments, they're all separate audits because there could be something non-compliant within some aspect of this pipeline versus another pipeline. So I think that's where we come in with the platform level. And it's one of the things we're working towards now is actually having certification produced as part of executing on through these pipelines.
Awesome. Okay, sorry, we're not going to be able to get to everyone's questions. I might have a go at just commenting on them, but with just a few minutes to go, let's wrap up now. I think our key focus today has been on the team aspects and the internal platform, but I'd love to go around to each of our panelists and maybe leave one parting thought or kind of key tips that we'd like to close on. So who'd like to go first?
I'll go quickly. So it's always about the people. Like, don't care about the technology. There was a question there about DevOps used to mean Puppet and CF Engine. Love the shout out to the grandfather of config management systems out there. But it's always really about the people. And DevOps should never have been perceived as just a technology movement. And I'd say people should be learning the same lessons these days around Kubernetes. Don't focus on the technology to deliver things. What is it you're trying to build? What value does it provide to people? And what is the experience like of the people who are building it?
Love it. Tiffany, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'd love to go next. Yeah, I love everything that we've talked about around people. And I think it just goes to show it's like there's no free lunch, right? Just because you have something like GitOps doesn't mean you're suddenly like abdicated of all these responsibilities. And so, if I were to say one takeaway, it's just that, in terms of the processes that we build around DevOps, like we own those, right? They serve us. So don't forget them, like take care of them and love them.
Nice. And Jer.
I think, for me, it's like, and I always say this, whatever outcome you're looking to solve for. So in today's world, people need solutions when they're ready, want them, right? So I think of it as is my system, is my product available when my customers or the people that use it when they need to, not when I need it, when they need to. And I think that's where the people, the culture, tooling technology helps, but the people in the culture, if you approach it that way, that I'm building something to make it available when people require it, then I think you've got you're starting from the right spot, because you're always customer centric, or you're focused on the experience and you're focused on all the right things. So think of it that way, and I think that's always served well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nigel, Jer, Tiffany. This has been a great discussion, and thanks everybody who's joined us to ask a lot of questions. We're going to leave it there, but you can find the video on the CDF YouTube channel, and if you have any follow-up questions, either post them there or join us in Slack. Very quickly, before we leave, I just want to let you know the next events you can join us with. Next month, we are having the CDF End User Leadership Forum, so a similar discussion here in Crowdcast, and that will be all around tools and technology choices. So if you do want to have that deep dive into how should I be choosing my tools and technology, what's available in the landscape, we have Owen Bauer-Adams, one of our CDF ambassadors, and Jerop Kiproto of Google and the Tecton project, who'll be joining us for that. And then on the topic of security, we have the Supply Chain Security Con on October 11th. That's with KubeCon. We have the keynotes from the folks at SolarWinds, who will be talking about the Sunburst hack, what it was like to be on the ground at that, and how they're using open source to try and fix their supply chain. So links are dropped in there. So if you want to join us for those events, please do come along. But Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.